Sonic Chronicles. Now, this might sound weird, but Sonic Chronicles might just be one of my most favorite games of all time. I know that might seem weird because, well, if you've played Sonic Chronicles, then you know. It's not exactly in the upper echelon of Sonic titles. And I will fully admit, if we're looking at the game objectively speaking, then you can definitely point out its, less than stellar gameplay, the terrible music, the terrible sound effects. It just, the entire package just really isn't great. But if there is one thing that I love about Sonic Chronicles, well, maybe not really one thing. It's sort of a collection of things that come together. Well, let me ask you all this. Why do some people enjoy things like The Room, right? Why do people enjoy bad movies, or maybe bad songs, or even, bad video games on an objective level? Well, it's because there might be certain aspects to the game that just really appeals to you, that maybe you couldn't really explain. And to me, that piece of, objectively bad media that I really love is Sonic Chronicles, and that's for two reasons, I think, specifically. There's many small reasons, but the big two main reasons that I want to talk about is, number one, I think this game is hilarious. Now, when I was playing it, as a young lad who didn't quite understand the terrible product that was before him, and I was just playing the game at face value, I thought it was the coolest game I had ever played. Because I was a pretty big fan of Sonic. It was around the time where, my love of gaming, or I guess my tastes in gaming, was starting to shift a little bit. It wasn't quite there yet to what it is now, but it was sort of in that period where I was shifting away from, platformers and, games to story games, or games that put a bigger focus on the narrative, so to speak. And funnily enough, I think it's actually at this point where I started becoming less and less of a Nintendo fan, and I started becoming more and more, well, I still like Nintendo, but I guess by that I mean I became less and less thrilled to buy the latest Mario, because I think the earliest or the latest Mario game I've played was, funnily enough, Super Mario Bros. U. Which I know, what a great game to go off on. But the last mainline entry game I played of the 3D titles was Mario Galaxy, which, hey, great game to end off on. But then when I was in the midst of playing games like Sonic Chronicles, which I believe came out before Mario Galaxy, if memory serves, but that was sort of the beginning of my transition to those kinds of games, is that the best part about Sonic Chronicles to me is the story and the choose-your-own-adventure dialogue with the characters. Those, dialogue scenes are some of the greatest and funniest things you'll ever see in, anything. Just you can make Sonic so sassy in that game, and that's just put a smile on my face, just, making him... Because the thing is, right, obviously, when you play a game with multiple text options, generally speaking, you have the standard traditional hero sounding dialogue, and then you have the the indifferent dialogue, or the basically if we're looking at it the Telltale Games model, right? You have the normal human dialogue, you have silence, you have the understandable but crazy dialogue, and then the complete jerk dialogue. And I always thought it was funny to take Sonic, this character who to me at the time was too cool to be there, be a hero, a too cool for school kind of guy. So I'd always pick the options where he would just come off a complete dick. And of course, the story has to continue no matter what you say. And it's just so great. Those scenes and making, because I feel for an RPG to work, or even just a story to work, the characters, you have to care about the characters. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, if you just took a story, and it's like, or if I pitched a story, like let's take the example of, like, Mario, for example, right? Like, if I pitched you a story of a guy has to go fight a creature to save a princess, you know, that idea on its own, like, that outline of a story can be, you know, pretty cliche nowadays. But the great thing about it is that you could take any, like, cliche, like, tropey or overused concept, and you can just make minimal changes, like, here, there, and everywhere. And you can make it interesting, or fresh, or at least delve on maybe a different perspective of the story. But to do that, I feel personally, you need to have strong characters. I feel like when you create something, like, I guess any piece of media, like a story for a movie or a TV show or even a video game, I feel like the most important part of the story is the characters. Now, obviously, you know, dialogue is important, like the plot, the lore, all of that is important. But, like, what holds the lore, the plot, and the dialogue together is the characters. Because you can have amazing dialogue coming out of a character that sucks. Or maybe it's a character you don't care about, like, spouting nonsense. You know, like, if the final boss of, like, a Final Fantasy game was like, the feelings of light and dark wash over humanity, creating chaos. And it's like, you know, maybe that'll be interesting if it was being said by a character you cared about. But if you don't care about the character, then you're not going to care about the story. And the great thing about Sonic Chronicles, to me, is, like, all that dialogue makes the game infinitely better, in my opinion. Because, see, the thing is, and I know that this might be a very, very blasphemous or hot take, quote-unquote, for me to say, but I do genuinely think if Sonic Chronicles had turned out to be, like, a great game, like, let's say if Sonic Chronicles turned out to be, like, on the same level of quality as, like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, you know, I think I would actually love Sonic Chronicles more than Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I don't know about Super Paper Mario. I love that game too much to compare it to anything else. But I guess just the thing about Sonic Chronicles to me was just, I just love the fact that, you know, you can take this relatively simple plot where you have, you know, a blue hedgehog fighting an egg-shaped man and his army of robots, and then using 7 jewels, he turns Super Saiyan. And the best part about that is that you can take such simple plots and concepts like that, and you can do anything with them. And that's the same thing with Mario, and that's mainly the reason why I'm very disappointed in Nintendo for, like, intentionally. I mean, well, obviously it's succeeding. Like, they make a lot of money anyway. But I just, for my own personal opinions and my own personal biases, I suppose, for what I consider the best forms of telling a story, is I wish Nintendo would delve deeper into grander tales using the Mario characters. And you got examples of that with things like the Mario and Luigi series and the Paper Mario series. Of course, generally speaking, RPGs are supposed to have grand stories and narratives. But that's just why those games to me are special, because it took something that is relatively simple and you expanded upon it and you made it even greater and greater and greater. And of course, current Nintendo is making it all, you know, Mario especially, making it all come together into a homogenized sludge that's serviceable, but, you know, could always be better, in my opinion. And with Sonic Chronicles, especially with Sonic, because Sonic, funnily enough, right, a story about a blue hedgehog, like, Sonic has had some very deep lore and stories, and I know, like, the comics have always been around. I feel like that's always been something Sonic has had over Mario, is Sonic has always been able to tell, like, these deeper, darker stories. And I know that's in and of itself is a point of contention among Sonic fans on Like, what exactly is Sonic? You know, is Sonic a 2D side-scrolling, simple platforming character? Is he a deep, emotional, narrative character? Is he a wisecracking meta character? And then, of course, the whole thing with classic Sonic. So, you know, you pull a bunch of Sonic fans in a room and you ask them, what's Sonic? That's probably the most loaded question you could ask. But that's why I love Sonic Chronicles, I guess, to, you know, go back to my point that I said, like, I'm sure 8 minutes ago. That's why the show's called Ramblings. I loved the fact that there was dialogue options there, and, like, it expanded upon and gave, like, funny, silly little moments to the characters, because I think things like that turn a story from being, you know, serviceable or just good to great. Because, like, you get an insight on the characters and their motivations. I feel like that always should be a priority when trying to tell a really compelling story. So that's the first reason why I love Sonic Chronicles. The second reason I love Sonic Chronicles is Blockbuster. Now, I know what you might be thinking. What the hell does Blockbuster have to do with Sonic Chronicles? Well, I'll tell you, my incredible viewer, who I hope you're having a good day. And if not, we'll get through it together. Blockbuster, in the days of old, if you don't know about Blockbuster, if you're too young to know what Blockbuster is, then let me inform you. Blockbuster was a place where you could go and rent movies and games, physical copies. You know, this was long before you could get things over the internet. Or I guess, long before you could consistently get things over the internet, like, easily. Maybe, you know, that the age of, I don't even know, like, when did Steam come out? Basically, I guess, before Steam. In the age before Steam. And what I would do is I went into Blockbuster with my parents, and I saw Sonic Chronicles on the shelf, and I was like, hey, you know, I like Sonic now. I don't even know what games I played before Sonic Chronicles. I guess, did Sonic Heroes come out? I think I played Sonic Heroes. Like, in that time frame. It's like, oh, I'm a Sonic fan now, and I own a Nintendo DS, so why not get Sonic Chronicles? So I get it, and of course, like I said before, you know, I didn't realize the game objectively was terrible because I was just enjoying playing a video game as a young lad. And I remember I would play through the game on my first attempt when I rented it, and I got immediately stuck. I could not get past, and I guess spoilers for this game, even though I'm sure Sega's never going to re-release it in any way, shape, or form, which is sad. But I will, I guess, get into a little bit why. I got stuck on the Marauder Scout, like the first true boss / mini-boss of the game, where, like, before you get into the city, I got stuck on that boss for like 3 days, and I couldn't figure out, like, what the hell I was doing wrong. And of course, when you watch, like, playthroughs of people playing that game, like, you can breeze through that boss easily if you know what you're doing. And for me, I didn't know what I was doing. I got stuck. And then it got to the point where I never got past that boss, and I had to put the game, like, I had to give the game back to Blockbuster because I was renting it. I was like, well, damn. But I didn't let it get to me, because I went back to Blockbuster, and I re-rented the game because I did enjoy what I played, and I beat the boss. And I was so happy. And then, of course, you know, you hear you hear that iconic, terrible city theme. You know the one I'm talking about. And then, you know, you get through the rest of the game, you hear about, and this is, I'm going off of memory, I'm not looking this up, by the way. You know, you go into the city, and that's where you hear about the Marauders, and then, like, Eggman's around, and then you meet more Sonic's friends. And I always got stuck on the part, or I got as far as I got to where I think I was able to defeat Shade the Echidna. I believe I got as far as defeating Shade, and then I forget what happened afterwards, because I think I got stuck again. And I'll just say for the record right now, it's honestly a shame, or well, no, you know what, I'll save this part till after. So I got stuck, after beating Shade the Echidna, and I had to give the game back to Blockbuster. And I felt really sad because I knew whenever I would rent games from Blockbuster, give them back, and then re-rent them, the save files would always be deleted, which was really sad because, it's like, how am I ever going to beat a game if I don't have my save file from before? So I was sad about that, but I knew it had to be done. So then I re-rented the game because, all right, maybe now that I know what I'm doing, I could, do a mini speed run through the game and get to where I was before after beating Shade the Echidna. So I turn on the game and I realize that there's only one save file, and it's not my save file. And I think, there's a save file. So I contemplate I guess I could delete this save file and start fresh. But I wonder how far this person got. So I click on it, it loads up, and I have no idea where I am. And that's because they had gotten past the part where you defeat Shade the Echidna. But, I didn't know how far along I was into the game. But fortunately, I actually figured it out. Or I guess looking back on it, I was ahead of Shade the Echidna, that part. But I was before you go into the portal to the Twilight Realm and you fight the weird mind control aliens. And the funniest part, I beat the game. I beat Sonic Chronicles from that point on. It was a damn miracle and a half that whoever rented the game before I re-rented it, had gotten past the part where I got stuck, past Shade the Echidna, and I was able to pick up from their save file and beat the rest of the game. Oh, and by the way, I just want to say for the record, I beat the whole game without using cream, because I know that exploit where you use cream to confuse the enemies and then the game becomes a cakewalk. I beat the game. Oh yeah, and also the chows. Don't get me started on how you can completely destroy the game by using chows. I beat the game fair and square without using cream and without getting the best chows in the entire game. And I beat... and I guess this is the part where I want to, delve into... what? God, this is what happens when I try to think of 3 things at once. Okay, I'll finish this thought. So the number 2 reason why I love Sonic Chronicles is because it's... I have a funny memory associated with it with Blockbuster, and that's why I love the game. And then I guess I lied. I guess a 3rd reason why I love the game is the new characters. I found Shade the Echidna to be cool, and I found Imperator. I never knew how to pronounce that word. Ix. And the fact that it was echidnas. And it was the Nocturnus clan. It's oh my god, this is so cool. Because it expands the lore. Now, of course, I didn't know anything about the comics, which had already expanded the lore greatly. And all that nonsense. Oh yeah, and I guess I also knew about... I played Sonic Riders, which is a great game, by the way. And I knew Jet the Hawk, Wave the Swallow, Storm the Albatross. Those characters for Riders. That was the only thing I knew about the expanded lore of Sonic. And then, of course, when you beat Sonic Chronicles, the game ends on a cliffhanger where you come back and Eggman's you shouldn't have come back. And I think it's implied or shown, I have no idea, that Eggman took over the world while Sonic and his friends were dealing with Ix. And I was oh damn, I sure can't wait for a sequel to come out, and then it never came out. And I just, I was sitting there wondering why did it never come out, as I kept, delving deeper and deeper into, I guess, the Sonic fandom, as I became a Sonic fan. And that's when I heard about the infamous man, myth, and legend himself, Ken Penders, and the comics. And, I read up on that whole situation, learned, he sued SEGA or something about how, Shade the Echidna and the Nocturnus clan was a rip on, his echidnas and his clan. And, the irony of it and the fact that, his characters all look like Knuckles with metal bits on them. And it's honestly such a shame, what happened with Ken Penders, because, characters like Scourge the Hedgehog and Fiona the Fox and, all these other characters that, he made that, or I guess like he proved that he owns on like his end and can never be used by Sega, is a huge slap in the face, or no, a huge punch to the gut is a better phrase I would say for the situation, because it's like, how cool, could it be if Scourge the Hedgehog like became sort of a reoccurring villain in the same vein as Eggman, like a true dark Sonic. I don't know, and that's kind of sad, and it's like that whole legal battle with Sonic Chronicles and Ken Penders and the whole thing just made Sega just throw up their hands. It's like, nah. And then of course, it didn't help that the game sucked. Like, I imagine if Sonic Chronicles had sold more copies and had been more well-liked by critics and fans, maybe Sega would have pushed through with the sequel and like maybe change some things around so that it wouldn't piss off Ken Penders. But sadly it never came to be, and Sega hasn't tried making any sort of Sonic RPG since. Although hell, Sega hasn't bothered really making any sort of Sonic spin-offs lately. Heaven forbid we haven't seen a new Sonic Riders game since Free Riders, and that game had its own problems with the Kinect. Sonic Team Racing, I think had like its moment in the sun, but I feel like that series is also kind of gone by now. Obviously there's been no Sonic RPGs. Now, I don't really blame Sega for not delving deeper into like Sonic spin-off games, because admittedly, now I will say this, Sega probably gets a bit more hate than they deserve, in my own personal opinion, with the games, because there are like shining moments in the Sonic series, but I feel like unfortunately it doesn't transfer quite as well with the games themselves gameplay wise, because if you took all of Sonic's games that he's ever starred in, or I guess the mainline games or games made by Sega themselves with Sonic, and you lined them all up, I would imagine the average of all those games would probably equate to like if we're being generous, maybe a 5, 6, 7, unfortunately. So, it's like, I completely understand why they would just want to focus on mainline titles only, because unfortunately they can't always guarantee that the mainline title is a success, unfortunately. With games like Sonic Forces, maybe even Sonic Lost World to a certain extent. But Sonic Frontiers is in a great direction for the series. I hope that game can inspire world building and lore, which I think is what they're aiming for, which I'm really happy for. So I'm definitely excited for that. But another reason why I don't blame Sega for not continuing with Sonic Chronicles is just, I feel like the age of the handheld video games console has unfortunately run its course. Because the thing about consoles and then handhelds, where you had like, things like the Game Boy Advance. I had the clamshell Game Boy Advance, the flip. I loved that thing. I had the DS, I had the 3DS, and it seems like the 3DS was kind of the last, big hurrah of the handhelds. Because, with the advent of the Switch, it's like, oh man, I could play a console game on my TV and on the go. That's fantastic. And then, sort of to a lesser extent, like the Steam Deck, right? Where it's like you can play Steam games on a handheld portably. It's like, holy smokes, that's fantastic. But unfortunately, as a result of that, because like with Nintendo, when you had, the Wii U, or I guess the Wii, or I guess when you have a main console and then a handheld console, you can have, games like the Mario and Luigi series on those handhelds, because it's not being made in like, because then you can have the mainline games on the main systems, and then you can have like the spin-off games on the spin-off system, essentially is what it is. But now, because obviously you have the power of the Switch, where you can, take console mainline entries with you on the go, obviously it's less incentive to make these spin-off games because you're only working with one console, if I had to like wager a guess, which is sad. But hey, who knows? I mean, Paper Mario is still a thing, even though it's not the best it can be. But if you want to know my thoughts on that, go check out the Paper Mario ramblings. But in the case of Sonic Chronicles, it's just sort of a bit of a forgotten footnote in the history of Sonic, which is a little sad, because I feel like it deserves a bit more attention, for better or for worse. But it's a game that I hold not really a nostalgic place in my heart, but more so just like an important piece of my history when it comes to video games, I guess, as strange as that sounds. But it's a game I will hold in my heart, and I guess if I had anything to say to SEGA about it, I would say, you guys should make Paper Sonic. Like, if you want my humble opinion, you should farm Sonic out to another studio and try and make... Like, if you guys want to focus on mainline Sonics, that's great. But obviously, like, you know, there was a huge 5-year gap, right, between Sonic Forces and Sonic Frontiers. Now, I'm no video game businessman or expert on the subject, just a guy with ideas. And my idea for you guys for free is you should farm Sonic out to another studio and maybe make like another Sonic RPG. If you're telling me that no one would buy a Sonic RPG if you want to delve deeper into the lore of Sonic, like with IDW, because in Sonic Frontiers you've established that Tangle is apparently canon in the Sonic mainline series now, because there was that bit of dialogue where it's like, man, I bet Tangle would like to climb these ruins. And it's like, wow, you know, does that mean IDW is canon in the Sonic mainline series? And it's like, how cool would it be if you can have the mainline series focus on, you know, Sonic's mainline friends? Because, like, you know, obviously, you know, getting to see, like, Silver, Blaze, Team Chaotix, even, you know, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, you know, get their chance in the spotlight again after being missing for so long in the meta era would be fantastic. But how cool would it be if in, like, you make a small RPG by another studio that expands on the lore, or, like, is in connection with the IDW comics, but it's told in, like, an RPG style, like Sonic Chronicles? You're telling me no one would buy this? If that got announced, I would pre-order it. I never pre-order games, but if that kind of game was announced, I would pre-order it. So that's my free idea for you, Sega. If somehow, some way, it's never going to happen, but if somehow, some way, someone at Sega is listening, there you go. There's a free idea for you. Well, yeah, I guess that's really all I gotta say about Sonic Chronicles. I guess if you were hoping for a more in-depth look at Sonic Chronicles as a game, you clearly don't know who I am. Plus, there are like 100 videos on YouTube that would explain Sonic Chronicles much better than I could. And, yeah, I guess that's this episode of Ramblings. Tune in for the next one. Thank you.